before the British Empire ruled the waves, it first had to conquer itself. Yes, wars existed all over the world, but you'd never expect this kind of conflict right on Britain's doorstep. When I first came across this story, I couldn't believe how much was hidden behind the usual tales of glory and kings. Did this story really have this much to say? You'll probably feel the same after hearing what really happened. Seeds of division. Before Britain became an empire, it was a battleground of clashing kingdoms. England, Scotland, and Ireland each had their own monarchs, languages, and laws. But England, ever ambitious, sought control. It wasn't just about territory, it was about power, belief, and identity. In these early centuries, England's conquest efforts were relentless. When diplomacy failed to bring Ireland or Scotland under tighter English control, the sword quickly followed. But the deepest divisions weren't just political, they were cultural and spiritual. In Ireland, the English crown pushed hard to replace native Gaelic customs with English law, language, and land ownership. Meanwhile, the Protestant Reformation swept through England, deepening the divide. The English monarchy embraced Anglicanism, while Ireland remained staunchly Catholic, creating not just a difference of faith, but a source of deep mistrust and persecution. Scotland, too, found little common ground. Its people, fiercely loyal to their Presbyterian church, and its decentralized structure, clashed with England's attempts to impose religious conformity. These weren't just theological disagreements. They were challenges to national identity and sovereignty. And with every push from England, the resistance grew bolder. Three themes burned at the heart of it all was sovereignty, identity, and resistance. Who truly held the right to rule, a distant crown or the people rooted in their own land? Could ancient traditions, languages, and ways of life withstand the weight of forced political union? And when foreign rule came knocking, who would rise, sword in hand, or voice raised in defiance? The ground was laid, the match was struck, and it didn't take long for the fire to roar. Scotland rises. When the English tried to bend Scotland to their will in the late 1200, they were met with not just rebellion, but legend. With the death of Scotland's King Alexander III, a power vacuum opened. King Edward I of England stepped in, claiming himself overlord, but Scotland would not be ruled quietly. In rode William Wallace, a warrior whose tactics and spirit would become the heartbeat of Scottish defiance. In 1297, Wallace led a stunning victory against the English at the Battle of Stirling Bridge, a blow that shook Edward's forces. But Wallace's campaign ended in betrayal, capture, and a brutal public execution. Yet even death couldn't kill the rebellion. Enter Robert the Bruce, a nobleman with the blood of kings and fire in his heart. After seizing the throne and fighting through years of turmoil, Bruce delivered the crown jewel of resistance, the Battle of Bannockburn in 1314. There, the Scottish forces routed Edward II's army, proving once and for all that Scotland would not kneel. It wasn't just a battle, it was a declaration. Scotland's identity was forged in defiance. While Scotland bled for freedom, another fire was rising to the west. Ireland, rich, spiritual, and deeply Catholic, was about to be swallowed whole. Ireland under siege. As England consolidated power, Ireland became its next target. But this was no straightforward war. The English crown aimed not just to defeat Ireland, but to remake it entirely. Under the Tudor dynasty, Ireland faced a cold, calculated invasion. Native Gaelic customs were deemed inferior. The plantation system began, seizing vast Irish lands and awarding them to English and Scottish settlers. These plantations uprooted families, reshaped landscapes, and laid the seeds of future rebellion. The worst wound, however, came through religion. England had turned Protestant. Ireland remained Catholic. That clash turned into a cultural war. Catholic resistance wasn't just political, it was spiritual. Irish identity was now inseparable from its faith. Do you know what the response was? Uprisings like the Desmond Rebellions and the 9 Years' War, led by figures like Hugh O'Neill, who nearly broke English control. But ultimately, each revolt was crushed, and each defeat tightened the noose. By the end of the 16th century, England had claimed Ireland, but not its heart, and that resistance would soon ignite again. But even as Ireland mourned its land and faith, the storm brewing in England itself would tear the entire kingdom apart. War without borders. Yes, the 17th century exploded into chaos. The English Civil War from 1642 to 1651 pitted parliamentarians against royalists. But this was no internal squabble. It quickly spilled into Scotland and Ireland, becoming a war across 3 kingdoms. In Ireland, years of frustration boiled over in the 1641 rebellion. Catholic Irish rose against Protestant settlers in a campaign of violent retribution. The English response? Total war. In 1649, Oliver Cromwell landed in Ireland with his new model army. What followed was genocide by another name. The siege of Drogheda saw civilians and prisoners massacred. Wexford fell next, with equal brutality. Cromwell's orders were clear: leave no resistance. Scotland, too, resisted the rising tide of English authoritarianism. Cromwell saw it as a rebellion and crushed the Scottish royalist armies at Dunbar in 1650 and Worcester in 1651. The Scottish Parliament was dissolved. English soldiers walked the streets of Edinburgh. The 3 kingdoms had become one battlefield, and Cromwell left them drenched in blood. With the kingdoms subdued by sword and fire, England had one more weapon to use: legislation. Acts of Union. Conquest through war is one thing, conquest through law is another. In 1770, the Act of Union officially joined England and Scotland, forming the Kingdom of Great Britain. The Scottish Parliament was dissolved and power centralised in London. On the surface, it looked like a political handshake, but beneath, it felt more like a takeover. Economic incentives were dangled before Scottish elites, promising access to trade and prosperity. Enough of them took the bait to secure the vote. But on the streets and in the Highlands, the people saw it differently. Poet Robert Burns called it a betrayal. We're bought and sold for English gold. Across the Highlands, resentment turned to revolution. The Jacobite risings would follow, but more on that soon. Then, in 1801, it was Ireland's turn. The Second Act of Union absorbed Ireland into the growing British state, creating the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland. But the scars of past suppression hadn't faded. Irish Catholics, still barred from holding political office and still treated as outsiders in their own land, saw little reason to celebrate. Though Ireland was granted seats in the new parliament, those seats came without a meaningful voice. These legal unions were billed as steps toward peace and stability, but instead, they laid the groundwork for deeper resentment. You can silence parliaments, you can burn cities, but rebellion? Rebellion waits. And when it comes back with fire. The return of rebellion. The Acts of Union didn't end the resistance, they gave it a new shape. In Scotland, the dream of a Stuart king returned. The Jacobite risings of 1715 and 1745 saw Highland clans rise under the banner of Bonnie Prince Charlie. At Culloden 1746, that dream died in blood. But Scottish pride lived on. In Ireland, the rebellion never left. From Theobald Wolfe Tone's failed revolt in 1798 to the Easter Rising of 1916, Irish patriots continued to fight, write, and die for freedom. The 19th century brought the slow burn of nationalism. The Home Rule movement gained traction. The early 20th century brought civil war, guerrilla resistance, and finally, in 1921, the creation of the Irish Free State. But even that wasn't the end. Northern Ireland, carved out and kept under British rule, became a powder keg. For decades, it exploded into violence during the Troubles, a period of conflict that left thousands dead And still, the echoes haven't faded. Because the story of Britain's internal wars didn't end. They simply evolved. Empire at home. Before India. Before Africa. Before the Caribbean. Britain built an empire at home. What happened in Scotland and Ireland were not accidents of history. They were blueprints for colonial conquest. Divide, dominate, erase, and replace. England practiced at home what it would later export abroad. The scars of that internal empire remain. Scotland's 2014 independence referendum brought the UK to the brink. Northern Ireland's fragile peace still trembles under the weight of Brexit and historical trauma. The British Empire was not born in London. It was born in the blood of Bannockburn, the ashes of Drogheda, and the shattered halls of the Scottish Parliament. What united these stories was the fight for sovereignty, the defense of identity, the refusal to surrender freedom. And in that struggle, the empire learned its most powerful weapon wasn't ships or muskets. Yes, it was control.